You don't really like tomatoes. Okay, now that I've got the hook out of the way, let me go back on what I said. You might not like tomatoes. Some people love them, some hate them, and some just couldn't care less. That was not true for Britain in the 1600s though. Nowadays, tomatoes are pretty uncontroversial. We see them everywhere in Western cuisine, but around 400 to 500 years ago, Europe had just discovered them. The Spanish were the first to bring them to the continent. It's believed that they originated in the Andes, in South America, and with colonization they were cultivated and brought to the Iberian Peninsula by the Spanish people. As the plant spread, it reached the British Isles, and in 1597, a cheeky Englishman who weirdly worked both as a barber and a surgeon, which I guess do share some similarities at the time, they both use scissors, decided to plagiarize some apparently inaccurate botanical information from other researchers and publish it as his own book. Apparently, he could do anything. But turns out he got a lot of attention, not for stealing other people's work, no. It was because this book, the Herball, depicted tomatoes, the fruit so many of us love today, as possibly one of the most dangerous things you could eat. He was not convinced by the Italians and Spanish that loved it so much. No, for some reason he figured that it was poisonous and you should not eat it under any circumstances. Because of his book, for centuries people began to spread the word that tomatoes were unsafe to eat. It actually is a little bit more complicated and simple as well than that. First, let's get some context. At the time, people believed in something called the theory of the four humors. You were classified along two axes, hot or cold, moist or dry, and it was a tool to help define your health. Ideally, a person would have all those elements perfectly balanced, but as you probably expected, that wasn't the case for tons of people. Some could have a dominant hot, cold, moist, or dry aspect, and that would explain some changes in mood and well-being. Now, these imbalances were pretty frowned upon. Everyone should be expected to try to keep it steadily balanced, and since it signaled good health and longevity, people did go above and beyond to get that in check. Alright, now, but how does that relate to tomatoes, you may be asking? Well, one of the ways people believed that their balance could be disrupted was with food. They used to also classify the stuff that they ate in the two axes, and as you can imagine, tomatoes were not exempt. This wasn't a very rigid system though. Each botanist, for example, could place an edible plant differently in the axis. It all depended on what they believed, and our favorite barber, contrary to some of his colleagues, deemed that not only was the tomato cold, it was perhaps one of the coldest foods he had ever seen. He used some logic, proving it by saying that he cut off some branches of the plant, threw them in the garden in a hot, dry summer day, and they sprouted back to life. Honestly, pretty sound scientific evidence for the time. He also claimed the tomato was a very moist food, and frankly speaking, we can agree on that. Besides his pseudo-scientific approach though, there is some truth to what John Gerard and many believed. The tomato is part of a family of fruits known as the nightshades, which basically means that it has some pretty poisonous siblings and cousins, and it's believed to have some amount of toxic substances, though it's very little. So, technically what he said had some truth to it, and by all means for a 1600s botanist, his work was okay for the time, so long as you forget that he plagiarized a good bit of it. And it wasn't long until the word spread. Today, we clearly see that this is a misunderstanding, but for the 1600s, come on, they had just discovered that their ships wouldn't fall off Earth if they sailed too far. So yeah, you can enjoy your tomatoes in peace. They aren't this deadly, dangerous fruit that you were believed they were. There are some myths that try to explain it though. You might have heard the story that they were believed to be poisonous because the tomato's acidity would release lead that was in the plates at the time. But even if it did, it was a minimal amount. As far as records go, eating a tomato has never killed anybody. By the way, in the description of this video, I put a link to the Internet Archive where you can find and flip through John Gerard's The Herbal. It's a really fun read. If you want to see his takes on tomatoes, it's on page 275, though you might need some outdated English to understand all of it. The link will send you directly there, and just so you know, tomatoes were called love apples in the past. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. It took me a while to research, record, and make all the slides and edits that I needed for this video. If you think the video was fun and an interesting watch, consider subscribing. It really helps me and my work. Thank you, and see you in the next video. Bye bye!